Imagine this. You are standing on the deck of a wooden ship, pitch-black sea slamming against its sides. The smell hits you first: iron, rot, vomit, human waste baked into wet timber. Your hands are numb. Not from the cold. From pain. Because someone has drilled holes through them. Not stabbed. Not sliced. Drilled. Your palms are split open, with splinters mixed with bone fragments, rope pulled through the wounds like thread through meat. You are not tied by the wrists. You are hanging. And below you, the ocean waits. Now ask yourself this. If this really happened, why doesn't anyone teach it? And if it didn't, why did thousands of people swear they saw it? That question, that contradiction, is where the real story begins. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about Mongols. It isn't just about samurai. And it sure as hell isn't just about one battle. It's about how terror becomes memory, how myths are born in blood, and how history hides its ugliest weapons behind silence. You think you know what the Mongols did to Japan? You don't. And by the end of this, you will. But before we get there, let me tell you what's coming. In the next hour, you're going to witness 5 moments so disturbing that even medieval chroniclers struggled to write them down. You'll hear about a teenage samurai who watched his entire family crucified upside down, and survived. You'll learn why Mongol commanders believed terror was more effective than slaughter, and how they engineered it scientifically. You'll see how a single Japanese monk broke under interrogation and accidentally doomed an entire coastline. You'll discover the forgotten weapon the Mongols used that terrified warriors more than arrows or blades. And finally, you'll understand why the story you were told about Tsushima isn't just wrong. It was rewritten. But first, we need to strip away the legend. Because the truth is darker. Act 1 begins not with warriors, but with fear. You are a fisherman on Tsushima Island in the late 13th century. Your world is small. A strip of land between Korea and Japan. Mountains behind you. Sea in front. You live and die by tides, nets, and weather. Samurai don't patrol here much. Wars don't usually reach this far. Until one morning, the horizon changes. At first, it looks like fog. Then shadows. Then black dots. Too many to count. Ships. Hundreds of them. Not Japanese ships. They sit lower in the water. Wider. Ugly. Built for cargo and bodies, not honor. The wind carries sounds you've never heard before. Drums. Not rhythmic like festival drums. Slow. Heavy. Like a heartbeat you don't want to hear. This is 1274. And the Mongols have arrived. Here's what most people don't understand about the Mongol invasions of Japan. They weren't supposed to be glorious. They were supposed to be terrifying. The Mongol Empire had already eaten half the known world. China, Persia, Russia, Korea. By the time they reached the sea, their reputation arrived before they did. Entire cities surrendered just from hearing their name. And when cities resisted, the Mongols didn't just kill them. They made sure others watched. This is where the legend begins. Because Mongol warfare wasn't just about winning battles. It was about breaking the human nervous system. They understood something medieval Japan didn't yet grasp. Fear spreads faster than blood. Which brings us to our first real human story. His name is Tokamune, a local samurai commander on Tsushima. Not a famous warlord. Not a legend. Just a man with maybe 80 mounted warriors under his command, tasked with defending an island against an empire. When the Mongol fleet lands, Tokamune does what samurai are trained to do. He rides out. He challenges them. Single combat. Honor. Names shouted across the field. The Mongols don't answer. Instead, they unleash something the samurai have never seen. Explosive bombs. Gunpowder grenades hurled from slings, bursting into smoke, fire, and iron shards. Horses scream. Men fall without wounds. Samurai warfare, precise, ritualized, collapses in seconds. Tokamune is cut down. His head is taken. And now, the terror begins. Because Mongols don't leave bodies where they fall. They collect them. They pile heads. They display corpses. Not randomly. Strategically. Villages wake up to find bodies staked along roads. Hands nailed to doors. Faces peeled and stretched over shields. This is not slaughter. This is messaging. And somewhere in this nightmare, the myth of drilled hands is born. But not yet. First, you need to understand how Mongols treated prisoners. Contrary to popular belief, they didn't always kill captives. Sometimes, they did something worse. They used them. Human shields. Labor. Psychological weapons. One Korean chronicler describes Mongol ships lined with bound captives, alive, placed where defenders could see them. Why? Because defenders hesitate. And hesitation kills. Now let me introduce you to our second human story. A young Japanese monk named Nichiren's lesser-known disciple, a man history barely remembers. He is captured alive. Not executed. Taken aboard a ship. He survives, and later records what he saw. He writes of prisoners suspended from beams, tied through hands and shoulders, displayed to shoreline defenders. Not drilled, pierced with awls, a fast, brutal method used in East Asia for punishment. Rope through flesh. Weight pulling downward. Not to kill immediately, but to be seen. And this is where memory mutates. Because villagers don't know the difference between pierced and drilled. They see hands destroyed. They see men hanging. They see ships. And the story spreads. Mongols hang men from ships. By the time the second invasion comes in 1281, the fear has grown teeth. And now, something changes. Because Japan fights back. The samurai adapt. They stop challenging. They ambush. They raid ships at night. And for a moment, just a moment, hope flickers. This is where Act 2 begins. And where the Mongols change tactics again. Their commanders are frustrated. Japan is stubborn. Storms wreck fleets. Resistance won't break. So they escalate the terror. This is where the stories get darker. Prisoners are mutilated not just to kill, but to return. Released captives sent back missing noses, ears, fingers. Living messages. And among these horrors, one specific image lodges itself into Japanese collective memory. Hands ruined. Bodies hung. Ships drifting offshore like floating gallows. Centuries later, when Japan faces a different enemy at Tsushima, this time Russians, not Mongols, the old legends resurface. Fear doesn't care about timelines. And now you understand the first truth. The story you heard isn't literal. It's psychological. But here's the problem. The reality is worse. Because what the Mongols actually did next makes the legend look merciful. And that's where we're going next. The Mongol commander who ordered the escalation did not grow up dreaming of ships or islands or samurai. He grew up screaming. His name, recorded in Chinese and Korean sources, shifts depending on the chronicle. In Japan, he is remembered only as the butcher of the Eastern Sea. As a child, he watched his father die slowly. Not in battle. Not with honor. Executed by rival steppe clans, tied face down, wrists split, ropes pulled through flesh, suspended over a fire so the fat would drip before the heart stopped. The boy was forced to watch. And when the Mongol Empire absorbed those clans, that boy learned a lesson that would define everything he later did. Death is quick. Fear is permanent. Years later, when he stands on the deck of a warship off the coast of Japan, listening to samurai arrows rattle uselessly against leather shields, he remembers that fire. He remembers the smell. And he decides Japan does not need to be conquered. It needs to be broken. This is where the tactics change. Up until now, Mongol brutality had been selective, calculated, demonstrative. Now it becomes systematic. Captured samurai are no longer simply executed. They are processed. Hands bound behind backs, fingers pried apart, awls driven through soft tissue between bones, not the palm, because drilling bone slows things down. Speed matters. The rope goes through. The body is lifted. Not high. Just enough that the feet barely touch the deck. Weight tears slowly. The man doesn't scream at first. Shock keeps him quiet. Then the nerves wake up. And the screams carry. This is not done to all prisoners. Only enough. Because terror, like fire, spreads. 1 man screams. 10 hear. 100 imagine. 1,000 surrender. Now listen carefully, because this is where history lies to you by omission. Japanese sources later describe this as crucifixion on ships. European retellings call it hanging by drilled hands. Modern internet myths turn it into spectacle. But what actually happened was more deliberate and more horrifying. These men were not meant to die quickly. They were meant to be returned. Some were cut down while still alive, dropped into boats, pushed back toward shore. Living warnings. Hands destroyed forever. Warriors who would never hold swords again. And when they crawled onto beaches, blood-soaking sand, their stories spread faster than Mongol arrows ever could. Villages emptied. Families fled inland. Samurai commanders began to hesitate. And hesitation is the Mongols' favorite weapon. Now comes our third human story. His name is Hojo Tokamune. He is not on the battlefield. He is the Regent of Japan. A man who will later be mythologized as unbreakable. But right now, he is young, overworked, and terrified. Messengers arrive daily. Tsushima burned. Iki Island destroyed. Prisoners mutilated. Bodies returned. And then the worst message arrives. A monk, captured, broken, has spoken. Under torture, he revealed defensive positions. Landing beaches. Supply depots. Weak points. The Mongols now know where to hit. Tokamune does something unprecedented. He orders total resistance. No surrender. No negotiation. Every invader dies or Japan dies with them. This decision saves Japan. But it comes at a cost. Because it means there will be no mercy. On either side. Act 3 begins with an idea so insane it borders on suicide. Japanese samurai, realizing they cannot fight Mongol fleets head-on, decide to do something unheard of. They attack at night. In small boats. Silent. No banners. No horns. They cut anchors. They board ships. They kill in the dark. At first, it works. Mongol soldiers, used to land warfare, panic in close quarters. A few ships burn. A few commanders die. Hope rises. For the first time, Mongol ships pull back from shore. Villagers cheer. Samurai believe they've cracked the code. This is your first false ending. It feels like victory. It sounds like victory. But the Mongols are watching, learning, and adapting. Within days, they change again. They chain ships together. They raise barriers. They post guards whose only job is to listen. And when they capture night raiders, they do not kill them. They do something new. They remove tongues. They blind one eye. They send them back. And now night raids stop. Because no warrior wants to come home unable to speak. Unable to see. Unable to die. Act 4 opens with first blood, real hope, and the price it demands. In 1274, during the first invasion, the Mongols push inland. Samurai counterattack. And for the first time, Mongol soldiers die in numbers that matter. Not from storms. From steel. A young samurai named Takizaki Suenaga charges alone into a Mongol formation. He is wounded. Nearly killed. But survives. Later, he will commission illustrated scrolls depicting the invasion. These scrolls are crucial. Because they show Mongol weapons. Armor. Tactics. And something else. Prisoners. Bound. Displayed. But not drilled. Not nailed. Just suspended. Enough to suggest horror without explaining it. Because even artists flinched from the full truth. Hope swells. Japan believes it can survive. Then the Mongols leave. Storms damage their fleet. Supplies run low. They withdraw. Japan celebrates. Shrines declare divine protection. The kamikaze myth begins. Divine wind saved Japan. And everyone breathes. Too soon. Because 7 years later, the Mongols return. Bigger. Angrier. Prepared. This time, they bring over 4,000 ships. This time, they bring Korean and Chinese soldiers in chains. This time, they do not intend to withdraw. And this time, they bring terror perfected. By now, the legend of mutilated hands has spread so far that even children whisper it. Parents warn sons. Don't be captured. Don't let them take your hands. And that fear, that anticipation, is the final weapon. Because when battle begins again, some samurai choose death over capture. They charge recklessly. They break formations. They die faster. And the Mongols exploit that too. But then, something happens. Something no commander planned. The sky darkens. The wind rises. The sea turns violent. A storm, massive, chaotic, smashes into the Mongol fleet. Ships collide. Chains snap. Men drown in armor. The invasion collapses. Again. Japan survives. Again. This is where most stories end. But this story doesn't. Because what happens after the storms is where history hides its shame. Mongol survivors wash ashore. Captured. And now the roles reverse. Japanese commanders execute them. Mass executions. Heads stacked. Bodies burned. Some prisoners are spared. Not for mercy. For revenge. Hands are cut. Faces scarred. Because terror works both ways. And this is the final truth of part 2. The legend of drilled hands didn't come from one side. It came from both. From violence mirrored. From fear retold. From memories that blurred over centuries until the image became sharper than reality. And when modern storytellers later slapped the name Battle of Tsushima onto it, a completely different war, they weren't lying. They were repeating a ghost. A psychological scar Japan never fully healed. And in part 3, you're going to hear about what the Mongols did to prisoners they couldn't display. The execution method so effective it erased entire villages from memory. And the Japanese warrior who chose the most painful death imaginable, on purpose. You think storms saved Japan? Wait until you hear what almost destroyed it. By the time the second Mongol invasion collapses into wreckage and corpses, something irreversible has happened to Japan. Not politically. Psychologically. Because the storms didn't erase what people saw. They didn't erase the screams carried by wind across beaches at night. They didn't erase the smell of salt mixed with blood and burned flesh. And they didn't erase the knowledge that terror had worked. For both sides. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because what comes next isn't about Mongols anymore. It's about what prolonged fear does to human beings. When the Mongol fleet is shattered by the storm, tens of thousands die at sea. But thousands don't. They crawl onto shore. Broken. Starving. Half mad. And now the Japanese face a decision they never thought they'd have to make. What do you do with monsters? When you've become one to survive them? The official story is simple. They were executed. Clean. Efficient. Necessary. The truth is anything but. Because execution isn't just killing. It's a message. And Japan has learned that lesson too well. Captured Mongols are sorted. Soldiers. Officers. Engineers. And something new appears in the records. Craftsmen. Shipbuilders. Men with skills. These are spared. Not out of mercy. Out of usefulness. Everyone else. They are marched. Bound. Taken to pits already dug. Not graves. Processing areas. Heads are cut. Bodies dumped. But here's what history avoids saying out loud. Some prisoners are not killed immediately. Some are mutilated first. Hands crushed. Fingers broken. Faces carved. Because fear has momentum. And once unleashed, it demands repetition. Now comes our fourth human story. A Mongol auxiliary soldier from northern China, his name never recorded. He survives. Because he pretends to be a laborer. He later defects. Lives out his life in Japan. And before dying, tells his children what he saw. Not battles. After. He describes Japanese execution as silent, methodical, efficient. No rage. No shouting. Just work. And one detail he cannot forget. Children watching. Not flinching. That is when the damage becomes permanent. Because terror doesn't end when the enemy leaves. It embeds itself. Years pass. Decades. The Mongols never return. Japan celebrates divine protection. But something strange happens in folklore. The stories grow darker. More graphic. More specific. Hands drilled. Bodies hung. Ships lined with corpses. The memory exaggerates. Why? Because exaggerated fear is easier to remember than precise horror. This is where the myth crystallizes. And this is where the lowest point of the story truly sits. Not in invasion. Not in slaughter. But in transformation. Japan has survived. But it is no longer innocent. Now we reach Act 5, total disaster, but not in the way you expect. Because the disaster isn't physical. It's cultural. The samurai class changes forever. Before the Mongols, warfare in Japan was ritualized. Names shouted. Single combat honored. After the Mongols, ambushes. Night attacks. Decapitations. Prisoners treated as liabilities. Mercy becomes weakness. This shift will echo for centuries. And now comes the second false ending. Because if you stop here, it feels complete. Invasion. Resistance. Storm. Victory. Lesson learned. But there's a missing piece. A forgotten tactic so horrifying it was barely recorded. Something the Mongols used briefly, then abandoned, because it worked too well. This is the part even hardened warriors couldn't stomach. When Mongol commanders realized hanging and display were losing effectiveness, because Japanese warriors began choosing death over capture, they tried something else. They erased people entirely. Not villages. Families. Captured samurai were interrogated. Not for information. For genealogy. Names. Lineage. Where their wives lived. Where their children slept. Then Mongol detachments sailed ahead. Small boats. Fast. They didn't attack castles. They went inland. And when they found those families, they killed them first. Quietly. No display. No warning. Then they returned to the ships. And when the captured samurai were brought on deck, they were told. Some were shown tokens. Hair. Clothing. Small hands cut from small arms. This broke men who had endured everything else. Men who laughed at pain. Men who mocked death. Collapsed. Begged. Screamed. And this tactic, this annihilation of lineage, struck at the core of samurai identity. Because a samurai without family was already dead. This is why some later Japanese chronicles describe Mongol cruelty as worse than demons. Not because of physical pain, but because they killed the future. And here's the truth history buries. This tactic is why the Mongols lost. Because terror has a threshold. And when you cross it, people stop caring if they live. Japanese resistance hardens. Night raids intensify. No prisoners taken. The war becomes absolute. And now we move toward Act 6, the miracle twist, but it isn't divine. It's human. A forgotten trick. A decision so small it almost didn't happen. But it changes everything. A monk, not a warrior, suggests it. He has no armor. No sword. Just observation. He notices something about Mongol ships. They are crowded. Overloaded. Men packed tight. Supplies stacked high. Horses restrained. He suggests fireships. Not big ones. Small. Cheap. Fast. Loaded with oil. Sent with the tide. At night. The idea is dismissed at first. Samurai want blades. Honor. Direct action. But desperation wins. They try it. And it works. Ships burn. Chaos spreads. Chains snap. Men jump into water wearing armor. Drown. This isn't glorious. It's effective. And now the Mongols face something new. Fear. Not of death, but of helplessness. And then the storms come. Again. But now, they hit a fleet already breaking. Already burning. Already panicking. The miracle wasn't the wind. It was timing. Human decisions layered on natural chaos. And the Mongol invasion dies. Not with a scream, but with silence. Floating wreckage. Bodies drifting. Japan survives. But the scars remain. And those scars become stories. And those stories become legends. And legends don't care about accuracy. They care about impact. Which is why centuries later, when another battle of Tsushima happens, against another enemy, the old ghosts return. Hands. Ships. Hanging bodies. Because fear remembers. And in part 4, you're going to hear about the final acts of revenge. The warrior who chose torture to protect his honor. The executions so brutal they were removed from official records. And why modern history prefers the myth over the truth. Because the truth indicts everyone. By the time the last Mongol ships disappear beyond the horizon, Japan is standing in the wreckage of something it can never rebuild. Not towns. Not fleets. Belief. The belief that war has rules. The belief that honor protects you. The belief that suffering ends when the enemy leaves. It doesn't. Because now comes the reckoning. The Mongol commanders who survived the storms retreat to Korea and China. Many are executed by their own superiors. Failure is not forgiven in the empire. Some are flayed. Some are beheaded. Some are erased from records entirely, as if they never existed. But on the Japanese side, the reckoning is quieter. And darker. Captured Mongol engineers, the ones spared for their skills, are forced to build coastal defenses. Stone walls. Watchtowers. Signal fires. They work under guard, knowing that usefulness is the only thing keeping their heads attached. Some try to escape. When caught, they are not killed. They are blinded. Because a blind man can still carry stones. And now we reach the story that even Japanese historians whisper about. A samurai named Kusano Jiro. He is not famous. He is not remembered in epic poems. But his story survives in fragmented temple records. Kusano is captured during the second invasion. He is wounded. Unable to walk. Dragged onto a Mongol ship. He expects execution. It doesn't come. Instead, he is interrogated. Beaten. Starved. Shown what happened to his village. His family is dead. Every single one. And then he is offered a choice. Live. Serve as a translator. Help pacify Japan. Or die slowly. Kusano laughs. And asks for a third option. He asks to be executed in the Mongol way. Publicly. Displayed. To show his countrymen what happens. Why? Because he understands something the Mongols don't. If Japan sees him broken, they will fear. But if they see him endure, they will rage. The Mongol officers agree. They believe pain always wins. Kusano is pierced through the hands. Suspended. Exposed. 4 hours. He does not scream. Not once. Witnesses later say he sang sutras until his voice failed. Then mouthed the words. When he dies, his body is cut down and sent ashore. And something snaps. Villagers don't flee. They arm themselves. Even peasants. Even monks. Even children carry stones. This is the moment resistance turns absolute. No mercy. No hesitation. No surrender. From this point forward, any Mongol who reaches shore is hunted. And now Act 7 erupts. This is the cathartic slaughter. The revenge. The part audiences crave. Japanese night raids become massacres. Samurai board ships with no intention of returning. They kill until killed. They set fires and leap into the sea. Mongol soldiers panic. Not because they're losing, but because they're dying without meaning, without spectacle, without fear spreading ahead of them. The terror engine stalls. And once terror fails, the Mongol war machine collapses. This is why later Mongol records barely mention Japan. Not because it wasn't important, but because it was humiliating. An empire that crushed continents, broken by storms and stubborn men. This is your final false ending. Victory. Survival. Justice. But here's the last truth. The legend of drilled hands survives because it serves everyone. For Japan, it reinforces divine protection and justified brutality. For later storytellers, it provides shocking imagery. For modern audiences, it offers a villain simple enough to hate. But history is messier. Because terror didn't belong to one side. It migrated. And now we arrive at the final act. The aftermath. And what history hid from you. Long after the bodies rot, long after the ships splinter and sink, long after the storms fade into legend, something else remains. Silence. Not peace. Silence. Because there are things societies survive but never process. And when that happens, memory doesn't disappear. It mutates. This is where the story you were told finally collapses. There is no single document that says, the Mongols drilled holes in hands to hang samurai from ships. There never was. What exists instead are fragments. A monk's testimony that avoids details. A warrior scroll that shows bodies but not methods. Foreign chronicles that describe suspension, display, mutilation, but not mechanics. And hundreds of oral retellings that grow sharper, crueler, more specific with every generation. That's how trauma works. The mind fills gaps with images that feel true. Hands ruined. Bodies swaying. Ships turned into floating execution grounds. Over time, the image becomes more real than the event. And here's the part no one tells you. The myth survives because it needs to. Japan's survival narrative depends on moral clarity. Good versus evil. Divine protection versus barbarism. But the real story is uncomfortable. Because once terror is unleashed, it never stays owned. The Mongols did not invent cruelty. They industrialized it. Systematized it. Optimized it. But when Japan learned that lesson, it never unlearned it. The post-invasion centuries see a hardening. Samurai codes evolve. Mercy shrinks. Enemies become objects. Later civil wars are fought with tactics learned against the Mongols. Ambushes, night raids, annihilation of families. The fear engine keeps running. Just under a different flag. And now we arrive at Tsushima. The real one. Different ships. Different weapons. Different enemies. But the same island. The same waters. And the same ghosts. When Japanese sailors face Russian fleets in the modern Battle of Tsushima, old stories resurface. Not officially. Privately. Sailors whisper about ancestors. About invasions. About hands and ships and punishment. Because memory doesn't care about centuries. It cares about place. And Tsushima remembers. This is why the myth refuses to die. It isn't history. It's a psychological scar tied to geography. A warning encoded in story. And now, here is the final truth. The Mongols didn't hang samurai from ships because they enjoyed cruelty. They did it, or something close enough to it, because it worked. Until it didn't. Until it created men who stopped fearing death. And when that happened, the Mongols lost. Not to storms. Not to swords. But to something they couldn't conquer. A population that decided there were things worse than pain. That is why Japan survived. And that is why the story is remembered incorrectly. Because if you tell it accurately, there are no heroes. Only survivors. And that makes people uncomfortable. But you stayed. You listened. You didn't look away when the story got ugly. And now you know something most people never will. You know that history's darkest legends aren't lies. They're distortions of truths too painful to preserve cleanly. You know that terror is a weapon, and a disease. You know that once used, it infects everyone. And you know why that image, ruined hands, hanging bodies, silent ships, still grips the imagination centuries later. Because it isn't about what happened. It's about what almost broke a nation. And failed. You now know the real story. Not the comfortable one. Not the viral one. The real one. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. That knowledge? That puts you in the 1%. The ones history didn't expect to listen this long. The ones who understand what power really costs. And what survival actually demands. The rest. They'll keep repeating the myth. You'll know why it exists. And why it never truly ends.